Is it ethical to not pay your student loans? It turns out that saying you have a moral obligation to do so is mostly untrue, and people who frame student loan repayment as a moral issue usually reveal themselves to be jerks. It's widely known that there are consequences to not paying student loans, and yes, this question of whether it's ethical or not to do so is complicated. So don't start ignoring your student loan payments quite yet. But the idea that we should pay back massive corporate lenders what they are owed is questionable, to say the least. In short, while you should probably pay your student loans for your own financial well-being, the existence of student loan debt itself is far more morally questionable than the act of not paying it. Debt runs the global economy. Every billionaire success story usually starts with an infusion of funding in the form of massive loans. But while a small loan of $1 million could turn a privileged man like Trump into a billionaire, a loan 1/10 that size can decimate an ordinary person's finances. While the wealthy fund their companies with massive amounts of debt, declare bankruptcy, and are paid millions of dollars as part of golden parachute agreements, the poor get their cars repossessed after taking out predatory auto title loans just to stay afloat. While many might say I'm comparing apples to oranges, in reality, I'm comparing violins to fiddles. Debtors are debtors, be they rich or poor, and rich debtors don't deserve special treatment. Unfortunately, they have always gotten special treatment, even when debtors' prisons were still in full swing. In the first section of David Graeber's widely read book titled Debt, he outlines how aristocratic debtors in English prisons were given the royal treatment. They were wined and dined and allowed regular visits from women, while poor debtors were shackled in sections of the prison infested by vermin. Graeber brings this up to illustrate that it's ridiculous for wealthy people today, who are also given special treatment while drowning in debt, to tell poor people to pay their debts. It would be like an aristocrat in an 18th century English debtor's prison turning to a peasant in the other cell, shackled to the wall, and saying, "You should have paid off your student loans." Now's a good time to plug my Patreon. It's only $1 a month. Also, I have a second $5 category if you want to join my Discord. I understand y'all probably got student loans to pay, but if you have some money to spare, your support is greatly appreciated. Anyways, while debt enables the rich to consume excessively and hoard wealth, it's what ordinary people need to get a job and put food on the table. To do that these days, you almost always need a degree. And at a price of around $40,000 a year to attend, it's nearly impossible for most people to pay for college without assistance. That's where student loans come in. Your friendly neighborhood soulless corporation or government steps in to help. You sign a contract agreeing to pay back the amount owed plus any interest, and boom, your tuition is paid. And all you have to do is make the payments on the loan until you pay off the balance, right? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Many cannot afford to pay their student loans for a multitude of reasons. 9 million people did not make their first student loan payment in December. According to CNN, that's approximately 40% of all borrowers in the US. They won't face severe penalties for that because this comes after a pause in student loan payments, but still, that's a lot of people not paying back the money they borrowed from companies. Shouldn't we feel bad for Sallie Mae and other suffering companies not receiving payments? No, because this is exactly what they signed up for. When you give a broke teenager a loan for $40,000, how could you possibly expect them to pay that back in the future with any degree of certainty? You can't. Creditors assume risks when they hand out money to their debtors. There is always an understanding that situations could arise where a debtor cannot pay back the money owed. In the case of predatory loans, which is what a lot of high-interest private student loans are, this degree of risk is high. Except is it though? Extensive lobbying has ensured that student debt legally can't be discharged in bankruptcy under most circumstances. This is despite the fact that student loan debt is not special. Yeah, you can't repossess a degree, but you also can't repossess a Netflix subscription, consumed groceries, or other things that people normally pay for with credit card debt. Why is it that credit card debt can be wiped in bankruptcy, but student loans can't? Having any debt immune from bankruptcy law is unwise. If that Graeber book about debt taught me anything, it's that without bankruptcy, we'd have a world where any debt could theoretically be reclaimed. A world where making a stupid loan would be a sound financial decision. This is, in some respects, the world student loan borrowers are living in. In theory, they have to pay no matter what, or else the companies holding their debt could take them to court and garnish their wages. It is this threat of garnished wages and judgments against people that coerces them into paying their loans. State violence, again, according to Graeber, is what keeps things in check. Though he's less concerned with student loans and more concerned about countries in debt traps orchestrated by powerful nations, the same thought process applies here. The violence normally comes in the form of financial pain, but also if you don't pay your student loans, you might have armed U.S. Marshals show up at your door, which is what happened to one Texas man according to a CNN article from 2016. Though being thrown in debtor's prison is illegal, what do you call being arrested and detained for not complying with a court order related to a missed student loan payment? It's just to stay in debtor's prison with extra steps. Moreover, working a job where 15% of your wages are garnished to pay your debts gives the same vibes as debt peonage, despite the fact that working to pay back debts on its own is illegal. This observation is not exactly new. In fact, it's one of the core premises of the book Debt. Antiquated and unjust systems have been framed in a cold and impersonal way for modern sentiments, where simple math involving currency and purportedly neutral, disembodied entities like the economy and the legal system justify otherwise shocking acts of intimidation and violence. Under a system where you're faced with these threats, can you fully consent to the terms of a student loan agreement? While people point to the age of the average borrower as the questionable part of issuing student loans, the power imbalance and the threat of violence are a concern in any agreement between an ordinary person and a massive company or the government, especially considering that college degrees at scale are not optional. A portion of the population has to go to college, and that's a large portion, much larger than the amount of people who can pay out of pocket for an undergraduate education. So saying that everyone should pick up a trade is not a viable solution. A functioning economy is not one without tradespeople, but is also not one where everyone is a plumber or electrician because higher education is completely unaffordable. Though I am not an economist at all, and neither is the author of Debt for that matter, he's an anthropologist, it's clear to me what the solution to this problem may look like. Canceling student debt is a well-regarded one. Though that would come at a cost, the return on investment would be substantial. Consumers paying massive amounts to student loan companies, well exceeding the amount they originally borrowed, is a drain on the economy, and that's not some leftist delusion. That's a self-evident fact, supported by mountains of data. While I can't adequately lay out the pros and cons of debt cancellation in a brief video, the main argument against it, which is that it's not fair, is not based on logic, it's based on emotions. Life isn't fair, and it's ironic that the generation that most benefited from government handouts, boomers living in homes paid for by subsidized mortgages, complains the loudest about debt cancellation programs. People claim that if those with student debt band together and stop paying their loans, it will herald the glorious revolution dreamed about in many online leftist circles. I can't say that that's going to happen, and I can't in good conscience lead such a movement as a privileged person. What I can say is that history often sides with the borrowers, those who are indebted to the wealthy owning classes. The political climate of the US feels tenser and tenser every day, and we can turn to historical situations provided by Graeber in his book to learn how some of that tension can be alleviated. In the olden days, rulers would sometimes declare all debts canceled to stop chaos from erupting in their kingdoms. Many revolutions of the past involved destroying the records of all debts and not just chopping off people's heads, which doesn't normally accomplish much. Because I'm a YouTuber, not an expert, I can't give you a game plan for how to deal with student debt, but I hope you enjoyed this brief video, and please consider checking out my Patreon, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Have a great week. Bye-bye.